The umbilical parted with the most enormous bang, and instantly I tumbled down to the seabed and found myself in the most complete darkness, utterly disorientated, desperately groping, hoping to find the structure, to avoid walking out into no man's land, and knowing that I needed to get on top of the structure, otherwise the chances of my rescuers finding me were pretty much zero.
This is the story of one night in the North Sea, and how a diver found himself stranded 90 metres below the surface of the ocean without light, heat or gases to breathe, and almost no chance of survival. What happened to him and the incredible efforts of his colleagues to rescue him is an outrageous tale of triumph against all the odds in one of the most hostile environments on Earth.
I think globally speaking, you cannot have a worse situation than this. A ship totally out of control and uncontrollable. A lost diver with a limited amount of gas. I don't think there's ever been a diver lost and recovered for that length of time.
It was the 18th of September, and it was very much a normal day at the office, as much as it ever can be, I think, when you're diving in the North Sea. We were working on a sort of drilling template, which is essentially a great big structure under the water. It was very open, very easy access. Our umbilicals were very short, straight, and that day we were pressure testing, I think.
Basically, you see your A and B. We'll be opening and closing them in a sequence, and then doing a pressure test, and depending on what we get, we'll move on, right?
On that day, I was actually the bellman who stayed in the bell, didn't have to go diving. Chris and Dave were both on the job.
I think I was operating valves. We had Craig, our dive supervisor, in my ear giving me instructions.
It's almost bottomed out now, okay, Chris? So
I can talk to everybody. Other people can talk to other people through different channels, but they can't override me. So I have ultimate command of talking to the bridge, the ROV, the deck crew, and the divers. We have a series of traffic lights in the bell. Green, normal diving. Amber, there is a problem, but the position still holds heading, and red is abandon.
Dave, my fellow diver who was in the water with me at the time, he was just off doing another little job a few paces away from where I was. And then we heard the alarms.
We recognise the DP alarm, but when we hear it, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will run off and assume anything's gone wrong.
A dynamic positioning system is a system to keep the vessel in position, and to get that position set point, we need reference system. The reference system we had on Topaz was GPSs, we had the TOTWAR system, and the HIPAP system, that would be beacons or transponders on the seabed. In addition, to get the weather in, we have the wind sensors. We gave dive control the Amber Alert, and then we immediately went on the open communication, so they understood the urgency in this situation we got up on the bridge.
The way he said, we've got a problem on the bridge, I'm going Amber.
Go back on the stage.
You instantly knew that this wasn't a routine problem with the thruster. It was something catastrophic. I don't know why you know it, you just know it. So I said, go.
Craig was insisting that we get ourselves out of the manifold as quickly as possible, and you could just tell from his tone that this wasn't routine, this wasn't every day.
Back on the stage, please. Dave, leave everything there, Chris.
As they were heading back to the bell and coming up on their umbilicals, we had a red light. Red light is far more serious. It means we've actually started to lose position of the vessel.
But it happened so rapidly with the wind and the tide and the weather, you couldn't have comprehended the speed of how quickly the situation deteriorated.
The bell started just tipping slightly, which is a very unusual situation.
They had to get on top of a structure that I believe was 11 meters high, and they were working on the bottom. So I had to climb 11 meters and chase a ship that was going away for them from that face. So they had to go up 11 meters before they could start running after it. That was the issue for me.
When I reached the roof of the structure, I saw Chris's umbilical, and I could see that it was taut. At that point it wasn't tight, but it was taut.
I then saw that the chief officer and the captain were struggling to control the vessel and were actually had hands on the thrusters themselves, trying to turn the thrusters and keep position.
We were pretty much four meters away from the entrance of where the divers were, umbilicals were. Even by the time I managed to get the ROV turned to face the umbilicals and over to them, we were already getting pulled back off the structure.
The moment we got to the top, I realised that my umbilical, which had been, because it wasn't being pulled back by the bellman, I'd left a small loop behind me, and I turned instinctively to start pulling that up. And I spotted that it had caught on this transponder bucket, which is just a metal outcrop basically on the top of the structure.
Also, everyone back to the stage, please. Chris, I want you back on the stage.
And I moved to free it, and it began to tighten. And at that moment, I knew straight away that I was in trouble. It tightened so fast, and it was completely immovable. It had jammed right under. Yeah, and I think I knew instantly then that this was serious.
Chris's umbilical started tightening very, very fast. I couldn't get any more off the umbilical rack. I couldn't even get my fingers in to get hold of it.
The pull of the umbilical actually pulled me off the top of the structure, and I ended up being pulled into it, almost straddling the top bar. My first response was that my legs were going to break. That was my first instinct.
The rack itself, which is made of stainless steel, started to creak and bend forward.
Instantly, I lost gas. It must have got to the point where the umbilical was so far stretched that it had tightened the gas line. Very instinctively, I put my hand to my head and I turned on the knob on my helmet, which opens the flow of gas from the bailout bottles which we carry on our backs in the event of an emergency.
The bell is actually now tipping over, probably about 20 degrees. It doesn't sound a lot, but when the water in the bottom starts tipping over, you can actually lose your bubble of air.
I could see Dave, he was trying to get back to me.
I still couldn't get to Chris. I was maybe 3 or 4 meters away from him, presumably because of the stretches in his umbilical, and his was a bit longer than mine.
Then Chris's umbilical went so tight that it actually bent the front of the stainless steel rack nearly off the wall to almost 90 degrees. And I had to jump onto the seat, or one of the seats, and almost Spider-Man myself to the wall, because I thought if this actually pulls itself off the wall, it could take me through the hole into the sea myself.
It's hard to imagine what Chris must have been thinking at that time. He's there with the line that connects him to life itself, trapped. He knows he can't get fresh gases into his hat. He can't get hot water into his suit. All the things that are trying to keep him alive, he can't get access to, and he knows immediately that this is going to be life-threatening. And so he's going to go through the whole range of fight or flight reflexes. His heart's going to be pounding. He's going to be breathing harder than usual. And all of this in probably the most extreme environment that this planet has to offer.
At that point we were facing each other. He was half over the bumper bar. He was looking, I think, at me.
I can almost remember him flailing his arms, trying to get to me to help me. I have a distinct memory of sort of looking him in the eyes almost and watching him be pulled away from me as the ship moved away.
And then suddenly there was a very, very loud bang, almost like a shot. And then the tension was taken off.
I think when the umbilical snapped, because it was a very violent and noisy thing to happen, the adrenaline instantly kicked in. It instantly felt dangerous. It almost looked like a part of a film to see the light going out and being dragged away from him.
Almost dramatically got pulled backwards and faded away into the darkness, and I never saw him again. Yeah.
Of all the moments that I think back to, that's the one that tends to stick with me.
And then I fell back towards the seabed, and it was just the most complete and absolute darkness.
After the light went out, I was immediately being pulled away from the structure. I knew at that point that there was nothing that I could do for Chris. I was partly thinking, I'm glad that wasn't me. I don't think it was an emotional response. It was a survival instinct about getting back to the bell and getting back to safety.
Chris's umbilical parted. We knew it parted, I knew it parted because his screen went dead. His comms went dead, and the bell comms, I believe, went dead at the same time because we had a short circuit.
We seemed to lose communication with the supervisor at this point because of Chris's umbilical breaking. I was still shouting to him that we're canted over at an angle.
It was a 50-metre climb. Climbed hand over hand back to the bell. I knew that there were other structures down there that I could potentially get caught up in. My primary concern was getting back to the bell in one piece.
When the boat stopped moving off station, Dave's umbilical became slack again, and he could pull himself back up his umbilical and got onto the stage.
I was very aware that as I climbed up my umbilical, I was leaving a large loop of umbilical behind me. When I got back there, because the boat had twisted a couple of times, the umbilical had actually gone round the bell. So I had to climb around the outside of the bell before Duncan could come up on my umbilical. By the time I got there, I was exhausted.
I pulled Chris's umbilical in during the time we were still moving sideways, because it obviously had no weight on. All the time I'm pulling it in, I know that something's drastically wrong, because pulling a fully kitted diver in is normally some feet, and you do have to really put your effort in to pull it in, because I was just pulling in an empty hose.
I wanted the umbilical back in the bell because as soon as we got his umbilical, at least we know that he has some integrity in his helmet. If we had a helmet back in the bell, that wouldn't have been a good scenario.
The worst bit for me for the whole thing was when I actually pulled in the broken end of his umbilical, because obviously it's broken in different places. It wasn't a clean break, and I pulled in his hot water hose, which is still spewing water off, so I had to turn that off. And then I pulled in his gas hose, which is still spewing gas out, so I'd had to turn that off. And at that point I actually felt physically sick. I could have literally chucked up in the bell then, because I knew that Chris was out there on his own with nothing, no backup, anything, and we were not on station, obviously, which is why the bell had been tipping over.
The bailout was only designed to be used for a very small period of time. I think it is 1 minute for every 10 metres of umbilical, as a minimum. We had 50-metre umbilicals, so Chris's bailout, by law, only had to last for 5 minutes. I knew that it took at least 5 minutes for me to get back to the bell, so I assumed that if Chris had survived the initial incident, at that point he would have run out of gas and he would be hypothermic from the loss of hot water.
What I was aware of, first of all, was the nothingness. There was I was desperately looking around for the diving bell for safety, and there was nothing. There was no light, not a speck of light in the sea above me. And at that point, I probably had the first dose of good fortune of many, in that I bumped straight into I think it was a leg of this structure. I could very easily have turned the other way and walked out into the wilderness almost, but I then knew where I was. I couldn't swim back up because the air supply to my buoyancy jacket, which we'd normally inflate to get us off the seabed, had been severed along with my umbilical.
And so now
Chris faces this huge dilemma because the bailout bottle that he's using has only a few minutes of supply. He's aware of that, and he wants to do everything he can to make that spin out as long as possible. And that means exerting himself as little as possible. And he knows that his best chance lies on the platform above him and in climbing up to find that platform to give his teammates the best chance of locating him.
So in order to get back on the structure, I needed to find a way to climb up. So whilst maintaining contact with the structure so I wouldn't lose it, I edged my way along, and I bumped into the pressure testing downline, which is a 2-inch hose which came from the ship, which was lying across the top of the manifold, and I was able to grab hold of this and climb up. It was completely through feel. I was totally blinded. Yeah, there was no way of being sure what it was even, but I knew very quickly that all I could do was sit still and wait. The overriding thought was, I've got very, very little gas left here. When you think about your bailout bottle, it's designed to give you just enough gas really to get back to the bell, usually when you set off straight away, and I'd already used a fair bit up. So in my mind, it was a clock that was ticking, and it was ticking down fast.
Chris must have realised that help, if it arrived at all, was going to arrive too late. He must have had a sense of that. He probably had worked it out in his head. And so for him, having done everything that he could, he must have realised that this was the end. And yet he's in this unique place with the burden of time to contemplate that. In the pitch black on his own, to have those thoughts running through his head. And that, I think, must have been, well, I can't think, it's unimaginable.
I'd love to say that I was in complete control of all my faculties, but and that I'm a model diver and all that. But I can tell you right now, I was panicking. There's no doubt about it. I perhaps wasn't screaming and shouting and running wildly around, but yeah, there's a dreadful fear in you and a dreadful panic. Yeah. I have very distinct memories of calling Duncan's name, and Duncan was in the bell. It wouldn't have been him coming to rescue me anyway, but for some reason it was him I thought of, and I think I can actually remember calling his name out and almost pleading for him to arrive and sort of save me. I maybe cursed a few times as well. Cursed my luck, you get selfish in these situations, why me, and what a good awful place to die. I was very, very much aware that the chances were very, very slim. Once I think I'd managed to control my breathing, my thoughts were of mostly disbelief, I think. It was such a shock to be in that situation, and I thought a lot about my fiancée at the time. I thought about the house I was in the middle of building. I don't, for example, remember thinking I'm not going to see my mother again, obviously I love very much, and it would have been devastating, but that didn't cross my mind, I think it's more a general sense that your future is about to be robbed. Nothing explicit in terms of I won't have the 2 daughters I want and all the rest of it, but that I'm about to lose the chance of everything. Yeah. I think it's rare to get that opportunity to reflect on your impending death, because I think at that point that's where, certainly psychologically, I just didn't think there was much chance of my getting out of this. So your thoughts turn to the people you love, obviously, and the things you're going to leave behind, and the devastation you're going to leave behind. With regards to my fiancée, I remember apologising to her. I think that's the one thing I did shout out many times. I just remember shouting, I'm so sorry, Morag, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for sort of putting myself in that position, for being selfish in many ways. I was just apologetic, and That's my nature anyway. Yeah, and of the carnage you're going to leave behind, yeah.
As the bailout bottle empties and his oxygen supply fails, he's in trouble. He's in trouble because he has no more oxygen, but also because he can no longer get rid of the waste gases that he's breathing out, and so the carbon dioxide is rising in the helmet. And that has an important effect on the body. Most of the reason that you choose to breathe is associated with how much carbon dioxide your body senses, and particularly how much it senses in your bloodstream. And so as he's re-breathing these waste gases, his body is telling him to breathe harder just at that time when actually he has no fresh supply of gas. And that's going to be an awful, panic-inducing sensation.
Towards the end, I remember basically just being so constantly surprised that I was still breathing. It seemed to last a lot longer than I thought it would. But then eventually, I did start to sense when you start to run out of gas in your bailouts, it starts to tighten. It becomes a little bit harder to breathe. And I think at that point, I don't remember it explicitly, but I do remember thinking, here we go, this is it. I hope it doesn't hurt, I think. And after that, nothing, yeah. I've often described it as you went to sleep last night, but you probably don't remember the moment it actually happened, and I think it was very similar to that. I can remember the breathing getting harder, but I don't remember slipping into unconsciousness.
Chris's part in this is now essentially over. He's unconscious, and he's unconscious because he's been suffocated by the carbon dioxide rising in his helmet. Those gases, those waste gases that he's breathed out, are accumulating inside his helmet, and the oxygen supply is dwindling. And that's what's going to kill him. That's what's going to kill him. But there is another threat, and that's the threat of the extreme cold. And that too is making an attempt on his life. It's slowing down the cellular processes in his body, all of those tiny mechanisms that together are Chris's life, are trying to grind to a halt. And while that's a massive threat to him, it has a strangely beneficial effect. It takes his life and the moment of his death and it smears it out over a much longer period of time. And for Chris, I think that's an important part of his survival.
We started getting some information back from Craig from the surface that we'd had a run-off. The computer systems on the boat had gone down.
They had a system where they had, I think, 10 sources of information. If one failed, the other 9 would provide the information. But they all failed at once. It can't happen. It just cannot happen. You have to believe the impossible can happen to try and, all right, move on. They took some time to understand the impossible that happened, to move on to, right, what can we do? We can go manual.
There was a bit of chaos on the bridge. There was the DP officer, the chief officer and the captain were trying to drive the vessel manually. I asked them what was going on. Obviously they were very busy. They had a total loss of DP. They couldn't control the DP even on the manual joystick. So they have to actually operate the thrusters directly with hand themselves, which was something I'd never seen before, to be honest.
We tried to do a reset of the dynamic position system, meaning we went from manual control to DP, dynamic position control again. We did that 2 or 3 times, that didn't work. The next natural step will be to go to the independent joystick, but then nobody can confirm that system was not affected by the fault we got on the dynamic positioning system. So then we went straight to manual control because we knew all the levers and everything that was operational.
ROV, can you try and find my diver, please?
For 20 minutes or so, we couldn't get the ROV on the job. We didn't really know what the scenario was unfolding. We knew that we were a long way away from Chris. The mathematics and the physics were against him in the length of time he had in his bailout. I calculated at the time maybe 9 to 10 minutes, depending on how quickly he breathed.
Luckily, close to that point, the DP came back online and we managed to get control of the vessel again on the auto DP.
The idea that we wouldn't go get Chris entered no one's scenarios. We were going to pick up Chris regardless. We didn't want to be defined by this. And I knew I wasn't going to be defined by this. I wasn't going to be the supervisor who lost the diver. And Dave wasn't going to be the diver who couldn't rescue the diver.
The surveyor told me that he'd found the signal responding off the beacon. We ascertained that it was off Diver 2. So we knew by ascertaining that we had a good idea of where the position of the diver was.
I just kept giving them range and bearings and encouraging the divers, especially Dave, to be patient. We are on our way back. We are making progress, even though we weren't.
We got some good positive feedback from Craig from the surface, saying that we were obviously going into a rescue mode. We were going back to fetch Chris. At no point did he say recovery.
When we got closer and closer and closer, the ROV was in range to go locate Chris.
As soon as we got level with the top of the structure, we could see the diver lying in the middle of the structure.